Lesson 4.2. What we're going to be doing in lesson 4.2 is we're going to be learning how to graph linear equations. That means we've got an equation with an x and a y in it, okay? And we're going to use the coordinate plane that we just learned about in lesson 4.1, and we're going to graph these equations because linear equations will always make a line on a graph, okay? So that's what we're going to be doing today in lesson 4.2. First of all, before we can even get to graphing a line, they want us to check whether or not this ordered pair is going to be a solution, or will this point, point 1, 2, fall on the line that this equation represents. You may say, okay, well, how will we do that? Do we need to graph the line and try to figure out will it fall? That's one way to do it, but an easier way to do it is, remember, an ordered pair always stands for x, comma, y. Look at the variables that you have in your equation, x and y. That means I can plug this 1 in for x and this 2 in for y and see, will it be a solution? If I plug it in, will this side of the equation equal this side of the equation? If so, then the point lies on the graph. If not, then it does not. Okay, so let's try that. So I'm going to plug in 1 for x plus 3 times I'm going to plug in 2 for y equals 6. 1 plus 3 times 2 is 6 equals 6. 1 plus 6 is 7. Does 7 equal 6? No. So I know that this point does not lie on the graph. All right, let's try the next one. Negative 3, because that's my x value, plus 3 times 3, which is my y value, equals 6. Negative 3 plus 3 times 3 is 9 equals 6. Remember, different signs, subtract and take. So 9 minus 3 is 6. And I take the sign of the largest number, which is positive. So 6 does equal 6. So this ordered pair does fall on the line. Okay, let's try the next example. I'm going to plug in 1 for my x and 4 for my y. So 4 times 1 plus 4 is equal to 8. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 4 is equal to 8. This is looking good so far. So we know that, yes, this ordered pair does fall on the line. Okay, let's try the next one. 4 times 3 goes in for x, and 4 goes in for y. And let's solve. 12 plus 4 is equal to 8. 16 is equal to 8. No. So this point does not fall on my line. This would be the only point that does. So what we want to talk about now is function form. Function form is what you always want to write the equation in order to graph it. Function form, all it means is y is on one side by itself. That is so important for you to know. Y has got to be by itself. We don't want any numbers in front of it. We don't want it unless it's an understood 1. So no negative numbers, no numbers other than an understood 1. Okay? So there are 3 steps to graphing a linear function. First of all, most important, rewrite the equation in function form, which means y by itself. Then once I get y by itself, I've got my equation all settled. I'm going to plug in the values of negative 2, 0, and 2. These are always the values that I want you to use. Different math teachers like to use different values. I like to do 1 negative number, 0, and 1 positive number. So make sure that you use negative 2, 0, and 2. That way everybody's answers will be the same. Everybody's line should be the same. If you use other numbers, it will not be right. Okay, so we're plugging those in for x. And we're going to make an x and y chart. Then I'm going to plug those in for x, solve for y, and I will have an ordered pair. So remember, our x comma y, and I can plot the point and I will be able to graph my line. Okay, so let's put that into practice. All right, so in this problem right here, first of all, step 1, get it in function form. Remember our 3-step process. Step 1 was get it in function form, which means y by itself. What is on the same side with y that I've got to move? Well, this positive 2. How did we learn that we move something from one side of the equation to the other? Remember, we do inverse operation. So I notice if 2 is being added, then the only way to move it is to subtract. So I subtract 2 on both sides. That way it cancels out here. I'm left with y equals, now this is a part that I want you to get. If you can get this now, it will make your life so much easier when we get into chapter 4 and we're graphing actual equations without an x and y chart. You always want to write the x value first, then your number without a variable attached to it. So I'm going to write 3x minus 2 because I know I can't subtract those together and get 1x because they're not like terms. So now my equation is in function form. This y is by itself. Step 2 says make a table. So we're going to make an x and y chart here. And what values am I going to use for x? They were negative 2, 0, and 2. Remember, you're always going to use the same ones. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug each of these in for x and solve for y so I can get my ordered pairs. So I'm going to have y equals 3 times negative 2 minus 2. Well, 3 times negative 2 is negative 6 minus 2. Same signs, add and keep, so I get negative 8 as my y value. So I plug that in. Okay, next one. I'm going to use the same equation, but this time I'm plugging in 0 for x. Well, 3 times 0 is what? 0. So I'm left with negative 2 as my y value. And lastly, let's plug in 2. So y equals 3 times 2 minus 2. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 minus 2 is 4. So these are my y values. Now all I need to do is draw a line, I'm going to graph my line on my coordinate plane. Okay, so you're going to need a piece of graph paper, and we're going to graph this line. And I'm going to erase some of this work that I've done here, so I have plenty of room for my line. You want to label your x and y axis. This is my x, this is my y. Let's label our graph. So we're going to have positive numbers here. Negative numbers down here. Negative numbers over here. And positive numbers on top. Okay, so let's graph our first ordered pair. Okay, look at this x and y chart. You may say, well, I don't see an ordered pair. Okay, this is your x value, this is your y value. I could rewrite this as negative 2, negative 8 as an ordered pair. The next one would be 0, negative 2, and the last one would be 2, 4. So let's graph each of these points, and then all we need to do is, we're going to draw a line through them. So I go to negative 2 on my x-axis, which is right here, and then I'm going to go down to negative 8 on my y-axis and plot that point. It's my first point. Okay, the second point, I'm going to go to 0 on my x-axis. Well, that means I stay right here. And then I'm going to go down to negative 2 on my y-axis, plot my point. Then I'm going to go over to 2 and up 4 for my third point. Now, here is one thing that you can know for certain. If your points do not give you a straight line, then you have done something wrong. Okay? No matter what, when we are dealing with linear equations, that's what that word means, linear means line, you will have a straight line. If for whatever reason you're graphing and you have these 3 points wrong, you've done something wrong. Go back and check your work. check your math. Make sure you did everything correctly, okay? Because sometimes a positive or a negative number can throw you off. So this is how we draw our linear equation. Now remember to make sure that you extend your line all the way through your points, okay? Don't just take your points and connect the dots like that. That is not what I want. A linear equation has a line and it goes through the points and it continues to keep going. This line will go infinitely. I can keep plugging in numbers. I can plug in the number 10 for x and get a point on the line as long as I solve for y. So you want this line to keep going. Okay? So we're going to do the exact same thing in this example. So we need to get it in function form. So what I want to do, all right, is I want to get the y by itself. So I look right here. What is on the same side of y? This -2. How am I going to move it to this side? Okay, well, let's just do the inverse. The inverse is addition. So I add 2, which cancels out, and I add 2 here. Now, can I add 5x and 2? No, absolutely not, because they're not like terms. So remember, you always want to write 5x plus 2 is equal to y. Then let's flip that around so that I know it's y equals 5x plus 2. You always like to look at it when it's leading with y equals. Then I've got this in function form, because function form means we've gotten y by itself. Now let's make our x and y chart. Remember, the values that you are going to use are -2, 0, and 2. Now let's plug it in. 5 times -2 plus 2. 5 times -2 is -10 plus 2 is -8. 5 times 0 plus 2 is 2. And lastly, 5 times 2 plus 2 is 10 plus 2, which is 12. Alright, so now I have my 3 ordered pairs and I can graph my line. I'm going to erase my work so I have plenty of room. Use my graph paper. And you only need to do your graph as large or as small as your, as large as your biggest y value or as large as your biggest x value. Okay, so obviously my x values are not going to be very big, but because my y's are big, I don't want to make my chart too small. And 12 is going to be way up here, and I know I am going to need to have 12 on my graph, so I'm at least going to draw my line up here. It might be a little bit hard to see. Alright, so my first ordered pair is -2, -8, so I go over to -2, down to -8, place my first point. Then I'm going to go to 0 and up to 2, and then lastly over to 2 and up to 12. So my last point is way up there at the top. Again, remember, you want to take your line and you want to extend it all the way through. Now obviously with this you can't see the top of my line because my graph. Alright, but I am going to draw an arrow at least down here at the bottom so people know that my line does keep extending. Okay. Now the next type of lines that we have are horizontal and vertical lines, and these are actually very simple to graph. I don't need an x and y chart. I don't need anything. I don't need to put it in function form because if you look, there's only one thing. There's only one variable and one number. So what I want to do in order to graph these is I'm going to go exactly where it tells me to. This one tells me that y is equal to 2, so I'm going to go onto my y-axis and find 2. This one tells me that x equals negative 3, so I'm going to go onto my x-axis and find negative 3. So this is exactly how you would do this. I'm going to erase this, and I'm going to graph each of these lines actually on the same coordinate plane just so I don't have to draw it over again. Okay, so my first, but I'll use different colors. We'll do green for y and a different color for x. So let's first do the y, but let's write our numbers on our graph. And I don't have to make this graph very big because I know neither of those numbers are very big. I've got a 2 and a 3, or a 2 and a negative 3. Oops, I did not mean to put negatives over there. Okay, so whenever you have a y equals, this is all you got to do. Like I just said, you go to the y-axis and you put a point right at 2. I don't have to do anything. This is the one mistake that people make, is they look and they go, okay, my line should look like this. Wrong. Your line has to go directly through the y-axis. Directly through. It has to intersect the y-axis. Okay? Not stay in line with it, but just touch it at 2 on the y-axis. Okay? Then we're going to find negative 3, and we'll do that one in pink. Okay? So I go to my x-axis, which is here. I'm going to go to negative 3 on the x-axis. Again, same exact thing. My line has to just intersect the x-axis. I do not want it to follow along the x-axis. I just want it to touch the x-axis at negative 3. That is the biggest mistake that people make, is they will go, okay, my x value is negative 3, so here's my line. Wrong. You cannot do it like that. It just crosses the x-axis at negative 3, and it will cross the y-axis at 2. Okay, so that's how you'd graph horizontal and vertical lines. All right, so let's do one more for practice. I'm going to go back for a second. So I've got y is equal to negative 1, and I've got x is equal to 2. So they want me to graph each of these points. Again, your graph does not have to be very big on these because I know they're smaller numbers. So I'm just going to take my graph up to like 3. 1, 2, 3. I've got my x here and my y. Okay, so if y is negative 1, I've got to go to the y-axis and find negative 1. Which is located right here. Remember, when you draw your line should just cross the x-axis at negative 1. Okay? Then, when I have x equals 2, I'm going to do this in a different color here. Do some red. Find 2 on the x-axis, and my line should just cross the x-axis at 2. So x will always be a vertical line and y will always be a horizontal line. All right?